Erev Tov Vernana. Good morning in Columbus, Ohio. Welcome. My name is Wayne Firestone. I'm the Executive Director of the America-Israel Friendship League, and I am excited to be here with you today in one of my favorite parts of the world, a very specific region, the Arava region of Israel. And who better than to show us around our master tour guide, Reuven Solomon, and my dog Negative, who's a captain, who's making a lot of noise in the background. Reuven, tell us a little bit about where we're going to be visiting today. You know, a lot of people just go straight from the Merkaz or the center straight down to a lot. But if you blink or you sleep during that ride, you'd be missing a lot of things. What are some of the things you're going to be telling people about?
Well, you're absolutely right that if you fall asleep as we depart from the very southern tip of the Dead Sea towards Timna, and Timner is going to be our final stop today, from the southern tip of the Dead Sea to Timna, an area that is called the Arava Valley, which is about 112 miles in distance from the southern tip of the Sea of Galilee all the way through to Eilat. You would miss a lot of amazing sights on the way, because at first what you will see, as we will take a short drive and you will experience this, what you will see is very arid land, dry desert, hot, and all of a sudden on both sides of the road, houses, settlements, and a lot of greenery, hot houses and lots of plantations. And this is the central Arava Valley.
Well, I know you've got some great photos, some great videos you're going to show us. I want to first throw out a question to the audience, Reuven, because it might not seem so obvious, but the Arava region just became world famous in the past year. It's world famous for a lot of different reasons that you're going to share with us over the course of the webinar today. But in the past year, the Arava region became a region that has X percentage of its daytime energy needs that are being served now by renewable sources. I'd like everyone to guess what percentage of the Arava's daytime energy is now run by renewable energy sources. It's a hot region. Probably people are going to need some air conditioning. Ruthie Levy says 80%. What do you all think? 50%, 98, 25, 20? Lots of different guesses, 5%. A lot of people are guessing low, I'm imagining, Reuven, because it's hot and you're going to need probably year round. Somebody said 105%. I'm not sure about that one. But the answer is, and there may actually be a few of our loyal visitors on this series. It wasn't on one of Reuven's tours, but we did a series called Here Comes the Sun, which looked at how Israel's green technologies are being used in very exciting ways in Israel and around the world. And we learned on that webinar that in this past year, 100% of the daytime energy needs of the Arava region, including the hotels in Eilat, is now being sourced by energy sources that are renewable. Almost all of that is coming from the solar power fields, which we're going to hear a little bit about in the future. So we've got some bragging rights today, Reuven. You're going to show us some of the spots that people need to pay attention to and can enjoy on a future trip. I suspect there are some Israeli tourists that are down there now and are making this trip pretty regularly. So tell us about some of the things that people are going to see on that trip and can experience today virtually on our tour.
Wonderful. We first start off, as I said, at the southern tip of the Dead Sea, and we make our way south, parallel to the Jordan-Israel border, all the way in what we call the Arava Valley. We'll travel past the Moshavim, which are communal farming settlements, a couple of kibbutzim, and 7 institutes that are R&D, research and development institutes, specifically dealing with agriculture. Because, 100% of solar energy used during daylight hours is pretty surprising. But even more surprising is the fact that water is very scarce. It's the driest and hottest region in Israel, and yet 60% of Israel's fresh vegetable and fruit exports come from this area, produced by 900 families in the central Arava. So we will pass through the central Arava. We'll take a drive through. I won't drive all the way through with you, but past some of the settlements until we get to our first stop, which will be a kibbutz, Kibbutz Ketura, where we have a very special story to tell you about some amazing developments in the Arava. And from Kibbutz Ketura, we will continue towards Eilat, but some 30 kilometers before Eilat, we will stop at Timna, a nature park, which is full of geology, history, and Egyptian temples. And we'll visit that amazing site. So that's what we have in plan for you today. I'm very pleased to be with you today. So the first thing I want to do is to show you where we're going to be driving through on the map. The Arava Valley. You're looking at one of the many plantations, but on the map itself, that rectangle on the left-hand side shows you all of the southern part of Israel, but the Arava Valley, from where you see that the top of the rectangle and the corner of it almost, on the southern portion of the Dead Sea, going all the way down to the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aqaba and Eilat, is a stretch of roadway that is 112 miles. This is the roadway we're going to be traveling on, not all the way because we're starting from the southern tip, but we're not going all the way to Eilat today. We're going to be stopping a little bit above Eilat at the the Geological Park of Timna. But on the way through, right in the middle of that rectangle, adjacent to the Jordanian border, is what we call the central Arava, where this enormous undertaking of agriculture, very advanced agriculture, is taking place today, sometimes very surprising. On the next map, you shall see what I mean by central Arava. On the next slide, you'll see here that in the middle of the area that you saw in the rectangle, taking up about half of it, leaving the southern part of the Arava below and the northern part of the Arava above, out of it. But here are the major kibbutzim and agricultural settlements that raise 900 families, raising, as I said, 60% of all of Israel's export of fresh vegetables and fruit, and 10% of her cut flowers. And this is an area that is hot and dry, not too much rain, and the water they have is tapped board water that is saline, so they have to desalinate it and to use it, and able to even grow in this water with hydrophonic method of agriculture. It's absolutely amazing, and we'll continue with the next slide to take a little drive through this area, the central Arava, look at how bleak it is, and all of a sudden you see green on the sides. We've just left the southern portion of the Dead Sea, and now we're heading south towards Eilat. Now, a lot of the area is what you're looking at now. Barren, sandy, dry. And all of a sudden, here and there, an acacia tree. Incidentally, the acacia trees are invaders from the Sudan, the savannas, and they actually, in this area, is the very furthest northern point that they can survive in. So we have acacia trees all the way up to Masada. But all of a sudden, you'll see the green on both sides of the road as we pass by some of the settlements, kibbutzim and moshavim, townships, that are on the way, that are producing incredible quantities of organic, most of them, organic fruit and vegetables. And the range produced here is absolutely amazing. From fruit trees that you would not think could possibly grow here. Most of the fruit trees, of course, are date palms, but there are also pears, citrus, even vineyards with grapes, even organic wine produced here, and peaches, plums, apricots. The variety is absolutely astounding. And then you leave these past one settlement, one township. I'm not using the word settlement in any political sense. This is Israel proper that we're in. I'm talking about agricultural villages. And you can drive through an area that we just drove through, very arid, very plain desert. And then once again, you come across a stretch of hothouses, of date palms, grown date palms. And I just want you to pay attention now to how long a stretch on your right-hand side is agricultural. In this area where there's a sad lack of water, the water they have to get out of the ground. And we drive and drive and drive, and there are more and more hothouses, more and more orchards of if you look on the left here and there, orchards of dates and other trees, and also organic hothouses growing lots of pepper. In fact, 50% of the growth of the land is used for the raising of peppers in capsicum, some people call them, in the Arava Valley. And there's not a single Israeli who hasn't eaten Arava peppers, because they're the best and they're plentiful. And I'm sure you also had them in your supermarkets, because as I said, 60% of the fresh vegetable export comes from here. And we're talking and talking and still going past more and more hothouses, more and more fields of agricultural growth. And it's absolutely amazing in an area that is so barren that so much can be done. So how is it done? How do they do it? Well, first and foremost, in the central part of the Arava, there are 7 R&D establishments. Each one of them, we're going to have a quick stop here for a coffee before we continue, because this is a very special stop for bathroom pit stop, coffee, maybe a little bit of dessert or whatever before we continue on our journey. The 101, which is really a cute stop because it's got a lot of animals kept there. It's got a snake museum and lots of eats and treats. But that's not why we stopped here. We stopped here for a pit stop and for me to tell you that on the continuation of our journey, you're not going to be driving any further. You're not going to be driving with me any further. I'm going to magically take you from one stop to the next. But before we do that, we're going to show you what the Arava Valley has done. The picture on the left you see is one of the early Ein Yahav agricultural settlements in the later 60s. And you can see when there was nothing around how they were already setting up the infrastructure. And on the right-hand side, you can see the way it looks today. The housing, the agriculture, and the stretch of land making use of what anyone would think at first view, useless land. And yet it's producing amazing results. We're going to show you some of the produce in the following slides. And I want to tell you that, one of the trademarks of the Arava agriculture is organic and bio-organic growth with using hydroponics, but this is of course not hydroponics. These are growing in soil. But how do we control pests? They don't use insecticides, certainly not synthetic insecticides. The amazing story of biological warfare, the good type of biological warfare, is being fought in the Arava. In the next slide, you're going to see the soldiers of this war. These are little bugs that are commonly known as the insidious flower bug. I have if anyone is really interested, the scientific name for these bugs. But these bugs are good bugs because they eat the bad bugs. In fact, they're very hungry and they eat them in quantities. And they don't eat the leaves or the fruit. And the best part of it is that they don't hitchhike on the vegetables or fruit as they're being shipped out of the packing houses to the customers overseas and in Israel, because everything is washed off, of course. When these bugs have done their job eating the pests, they either move on or die out or are washed off the vegetables because they're released. They're brought in, incidentally, to these farms in refrigerated trucks, released in the packing houses or in the fields or in the hot houses, and there they do their work. A little more expensive, in fact, a lot more expensive than using synthetic insecticides. But the Arava is very, very conscious of sustainable agriculture and is very environmentally attuned. In fact, the Arava is perhaps the area where recycle and environment is more carefully looked after than anywhere else in Israel. And thus, part of it is these biological warfare against the bugs that are damaging to the crops, and with the use of insecticides, not good. So they do the job. Hydroponics. Look at these strawberries. They're growing above ground hydrophonically, which makes two advantages. One, it makes it harder for the pests to get to them. And two, the picking is much easier. Another slide will show you some more strawberries. The strawberries coming out of the Arava, let me tell you, are delicious. Grown overhead, and the picking is much easier. Here you'll see what we mean by hydrophonic growth. These plants are growing, these little trees are growing in water. The water is with minerals that the plants need, and all from nature, and there's no soil, soilless. And they continue to grow like this until, of course, they're transplanted and start producing. Incidentally, in the Arava, it's not only fresh fruit and fresh vegetables, mainly fresh vegetables that are produced, but also fisheries, also flowers, and in fact, 10% of our cut flower exports come from the Arava Valley. And you'll see in the next slide, many of the flowers that are grown in hothouses in the Arava. Tomatoes, cherry tomatoes and other tomatoes organically grown. What else will you see here? Hot chili peppers, also organic. And the most famous thing that is grown in the Arava, actually, it takes up to 50% of the land growth in the hothouses and otherwise are the capsicums, the peppers, in all varieties and in all colors, and they are delicious, organic, and in fact, Kibbutz, not Kibbutz, but Ein Yahav got into the book of Guinness by producing one pepper, one capsicum that grew to the weight of 1 1/3 pounds. That's a pretty big pepper. You could make a lot of shakshuka with that. Another thing that we grow in the Arava are the melons. These are miniature watermelons, and you'll see they're miniature in the next slide because, look at how they're brought to dangle overhead to make, once again, the picking easy and harder for the pests. Of course, traditional growth of rock melons and honeydew melons in the fields, once again using the biological warfare of bugs and only natural insecticides, nothing synthetic. Fields that grow all sorts of melons. The next slides you will see squash, pumpkins, in all colors, in all varieties, and all organic. So in this, here's an enormous eggplant, a nice eggplant also. And of course, the main growth in the fields of fruit trees is dates, because dates are the fruit of the Bible. And when we talk about further on, dates being mentioned in the Bible and in the Quran, we have a very special story at this place, Kibbutz Ketura. I want to tell you a few words about this kibbutz. Kibbutz Ketura was established just after the Yom Kippur War by the Young Judea movement, actually in October of 1973, in the southern part of the Arava. After all the moshavim that we drove past, you continue a ways before you get to a little bit before Eilat and Timna, Kibbutz Ketura. There are a smattering of kibbutzim there, and Ketura was established as a pluralistic settlement where each one would relate to his belief or non-belief in whatever way he wanted, but the public areas, like the dining room and so on, kosher and observe Shabbat, although the individual does what he pleases. There are some more than 300 people on Kibbutz Ketura, half of them members and the other half children. They have an amazing institute called for sustainable agriculture that is directed today by Reuven Solomon, that I'm going to be talking about in the amazing story that is going to unfold here in Kibbutz Ketura. But they also have an institute that trains, that has courses for overseas students who come and learn agricultural methods and go back to their countries, including, incidentally, our neighbors, Jordan and the Palestinians, and they have an ideology of sharing knowledge, sharing wealth, very ideological. But the story I want to tell you, I want to focus on in Kibbutz Ketura today is what you're looking at in front of you. I mean, you might or might not recognize these as date pits. These are very old date pits. In fact, they were found by Professor Yigal Yadim, the famous Israeli archaeology, at the famous site that he excavated in the 1960s by the Northern Palace. He found some date pits and he kept them. 2,000-year-old date pits, probably eaten by the rebels on Masada before their fight with the Romans. And these date pits were moved into the Archaeological Israel Museum after Yigal Yadim's death, where a doctor, Sarah Salon, who was an immigrant from England a long time ago to Israel, an Ola Chadasha, as we say, who worked in Hadassah Hospital and worked in a special branch trying to replicate ancient medicinal remedies from ancient plants. And she had the idea, after being familiar with the laurels that dates have been given in the Bible and in other in the Quran as very healthy fruit that cures all sorts of illnesses, as well as being an aphrodisiac and goodness knows what. And she thought, well, maybe we can actually get one of these seeds to sprout. But how do you do that? Well, you get to the experts. And the expert is Elaine Soloway, who was a member of, she made Aliyah in the early part of Ketura's history, and became a member of Kibbutz Ketura, and runs the Institute for Sustainable Agriculture as director. Well, Elaine nurtured these seeds and planted them, guess when? On the Israeli holiday for plants, Tu B'Shvat. Tu B'Shvat, the Israeli date for the birthday of trees. And she planted these seeds. And amazingly, one of them actually sprouted. When Sarah Salon came to visit and saw it, she gave it the name Methuselah, the oldest person in the Bible, more than 967 years old. This tree is more than double that age, sprouted from a seed that dates between the 50 BC to 65 AD or CE. So this seed is older, and it sprouted, and it grew, and they waited for it to flower. I'm talking about 2005 when it was planted. 2011, 6 years later, it became an adult, and lo and behold, it was male. There's this male-female thing with dates. Male trees only produce pollen. They do not produce fruit. With the male pollen, the female trees produce fruit. And Methuselah, sadly, was male. But Elaine looked for something that could be indigenous and found someone in the Arava with actually a wild date palm growing. And she immediately arranged a marriage between Methuselah, who created the pollen, to this wild date palm that produced fruit, which was pretty amazing because, you know, but it was not that amazing because it's 50% ancient and 50% who knows, wild date palm. Now, Sarah Salon wanted to get the genuine article, the real biblical date. So she searched around the museums and universities and found a hoard of some 30 seeds that were discovered in ancient sites like Qumran and a dig near Jericho, and got hold of them. These seeds were perhaps even a little older than Methuselah, dating from the Hasmonean period to perhaps the beginning of the Common Era. And she managed to get 6 of these seeds to Elaine at Ketura, and wow. On Tisha B'Av, the date of the destruction of the first temple and the second temple, one of these seeds sprouted. And thus they called it Jeremiah because of the destruction of the temple. Well, 6 years later, Jeremiah was discovered not to be Jeremiah, but a female. And they had to rename him, her, and Elaine called her Hannah, named after her mom. And Hannah, a female date palm, was ready to flower. So Elaine did the matchmaker thing. She took pollen from Methuselah and very carefully brushed it on the flowers of Hannah, and lo and behold, time, and in September of 2020, Hannah produced 111 dates. Hannah was much too old to be a mum, and Methuselah certainly much too old to be a dad, but the two of them brought forth into the world 111 dates that are as close as one can imagine, one can get to the dates that our forefathers ate, that the Romans were crazy about, that the Bible waxes about how good these dates are. And today, there's a hope that with more germination of ancient seeds, we can have orchards of dates that were dates from 2,000 years ago.
Reuven, our chat is just exploding with excitement from Methuselah's story and hearing about Hannah and the second version of this. Every time I hear this story, it reminds me of the modern day miracles in Israel that combine archaeology, biology, and maybe a little mazel at some point. I certainly feel we should say mazel tov to the babies, the 111 of them, date babies, somebody is calling them in the chat already. But as much as this is a fun story, and as much as we don't think about what it means to crossbreed plants and living beings that frankly died 2,000 years ago, obviously there are potential both agricultural and even medicinal possibilities in this kind of work. And I know that this is something that Kibbutz Ketura is world famous for. And as you alluded to, has, today we sort of take organics and sustainable agriculture as a given, but this really has only emerged in the past decade or so. I know you have permission from Ketura, and we've had guests from Kibbutz Ketura previously. Maybe you could share with us a little bit directly from their director about their insights and share what you've learned about them over the years.
Well, we have after another couple of slides, we have a short video that celebrates the tasting of this more than 2,000-year-old fruit. This is Hannah, after she was taken out of the pot plant and planted before she flowered. Methuselah, incidentally, is 4 meters high today, and one can visit Hannah and Methuselah in Kibbutz Ketura. I know you've actually visited him when he was still in a pot, right, Wayne, or was he already?
Well, yeah, no, it was before his bar mitzvah. It was a very, in his second life, very modest before the seedings and before the second marriage. So, seeing and hearing the subsequent development of the story is really just, again, it's an example of, if you think you know Israel because you went there 5 years ago or 10 years ago, or you had your, a trip there when you were in college. For others, well, it just goes to show you got to constantly re-educate yourself and update yourself, because Israel is this ancient country and civilization that continues to reinvent itself, continues to explore and go deep. And find new ways to make modern Israel even more remarkable.
Well, here you see the dates and Hannah, and in a moment you're going to see a short video from the Arava Institute about the tasting of these dates. There's the Hannah again. No, these are not Majul dates. These are, they've actually done a study. I'll talk about this after the video.
Great.
Today is a historic day in which we celebrate the harvest of the first fruit of Hannah, an ancient date tree sprouted from an ancient date seed. This is the result of many years of scientific research at the Arava Institute by Dr. Reuven Solomon.
Here we are with Hannah. She is the female tree that we pollinated from Methuselah's pollen. And she bore us 111 really nice dates with a caramel honey aftertaste. We had a bit of a ceremony in which we cut the dates ceremoniously. Later on, my husband Michael said Shechianu.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam borei pri ha'etz.
Amen.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam shehechianu v'kiyamanu v'higianu lazman hazeh.
And we ceremoniously tasted them.
It really is a symbol of the miracle that we try to perform here at the Arava Institute, bringing people from the Middle East together in order to plant a seed of peace, which we hope will someday sprout into a tree of peace and friendship.
Reuven, we're getting lots of questions from people about the name and the type of date that these represent.
Wonderful. The first thing I want to tell you is that the dates that we have today, the variety we have today, came from the West. This is what they figured out, because the original dates, the dates, the biblical dates from the period we're talking about, did not survive. Did not survive the Crusader period. The Middle Ages, there were no more, they were a species that only left the pits. And it's from the pits that this species has been revived, and revived 100%, not just 50%, because the mother and the father are from the original species. We're going to have to give this species a name, because we don't know what they were called dates. Tamarim. They're certainly not Majul, and they're certainly not the other variety of dates that have come crossbreeding from the West. Any other date questions?
No, I was thinking maybe we could call them blind dates, given their age, but we'll have to see. Again, just to capture the enormity of this story, those dates started on Masada. They were what Herod and his gang, and who knows, maybe our zealots up on the fortress were eating, and then 2,000 years later brought back to life, and are now producing fruit. And we've, as with other things in this part of the world, have to come up with new names for these new species that are being created. So Reuven, thanks for taking us there and sharing the one aspect of the sustainable agriculture that has archaeological and historical significance. But as you alluded to earlier, and in all those beautiful shots that you shared of the agriculture that's being created in unlikely and unseemly conditions, but really is the breadbasket of Israel for the creation of certainly the exports of agriculture. So I know you have you've got more in this tour. So I want to make sure that we get beyond just the food to tell us about Timna.
Absolutely. Timna Nature Reserve. It's just before we get to Eilat. It's an incredible geological wonderland that is like shaped like a semicircle or a horseshoe, if you like, with in the center the granite of the Negev hills, and on the sides, in a curve towards the Jordanian border, white, pink, and red sandstone that is easily erodible, and with wind and water, eroded into all sorts of very interesting shapes that one can walk through this nature park, and one's imagination can see the Sphinx and all sorts of animal heads and goodness knows what. But it is also a very important archaeological site, because, you know, at first, Timna was by an archaeologist in the 1930s called Nelson Gluck, identified as King Solomon's Mines. He called it King Solomon's Mines. And this, of course, attracted a tremendous amount of interest and people wanting to know more. And unfortunately, subsequent expeditions could not prove that this was actually King Solomon's Mines. But the good news is that after many years of saying, well, Nelson Gluck made a little bit of a mistake, it's not really King Solomon's Mines, these are ancient Egyptian mines, we've recently found evidence of mining activities from the period of King Solomon, from 1000 BC to 900 BC. There is mining activity, and the mining activity, of course, is where during the period that King Solomon reigned. So there may be much more to the first identification than we gave credit to in less recent times. Now, there certainly were mines there, and the mines there were Egyptian mines. You're looking here at a smelting site that the Egyptians used to create the ore, the bronze ore. I want to tell you a couple of things about the Egyptian mines, but I would like to, if possible, to go back to a couple of slides. Go forward, I'm sorry, a couple of slides to show you the actual mining system that was used in the 14th to 12th century BC, the Egyptian period, where the Egyptians created a mining system that defies imagination. They went, first of all, from the, I need to tell you that from the Chalcolithic period, and incidentally, that period, Chalcolithic period, dates from 60-something century BC to 32 BC, actually comes from the word copper, from the Greek word for copper. And that's why Chalcolithic, because that's when copper was first mined from the surface. But the Egyptians transformed this. They followed the copper, and I'm talking about 3,500 years ago. They followed these copper veins underground and into the ground, and they dug shafts, thousands of them, with an internal underground tunnel system connecting them for air as well, so that they would have ventilation. And they followed these copper veins to take out the copper in these ancient Egyptian mines. I'm talking about 14th century BC to the 12th century BC. In the period of 10th century BC to 9th century BC, they were probably Israeli mines, and thus King Solomon's mines, and thus the name that Nelson Gluck gave to this site may hold true. In modern times, Israel actually, in the 1950s, 60s, did some copper mining there, but when copper prices just went down, it wasn't worth it anymore, they moved out. But thank goodness the mining they did was not in this geological wonderland, but alongside it. In the following slides, you're going to see a couple of amazing things about this Egyptian adventure. What you're looking at here, we call plates. The white discs you see are modern closures to stop people from falling into these shafts that are sometimes unbelievably deep. I'm talking about 30 feet, 10 meters deep, some of these shafts, going into a system of underground channels, the width of a person. A miner would have to go down the shaft, crawl through, following the copper veins to dig out. This is a close-up, if you like, of one of these closures of the open mines, but literally thousands of these, what we call plates, most of them filled by nature, by sand, or perhaps by the debris from the copper production by the miners themselves when no longer was there copper in the grain, but there are thousands of these around Timna. The system was pretty good. You'll see that they actually had carved steps and holes to get down into these mines. And in the next couple of slides, you're going to see this. You can see that this is a shaft going down with footholds. And of course, mining was a very interesting thing to follow in Timna, but it's not the only thing. There's a display of the type of tools that we use to create this system. But you know, you're looking here at the part of the pillars to the right of the pillars of Solomon, we call them, and they got that name because we thought that these mines were associated with King Solomon. So Solomon's pillars that are my background on my virtual background, the name we've given to this natural erosion where some copper was mined out of them as well. But here above, you can see the railing leading up to a viewpoint of a rock carving that's pretty difficult to see of Ramses celebrating Hathor, the goddess of mining, or the goddess of copper. And just below it, as you will see in the next couple of slides, is the temple to Hathor. This is the temple to Hathor, the Egyptian goddess of copper. And, you know, the Egyptians, as I said, used it from the 16th to 14th, to 14th to 12th century. And then the Midianites also mined here. And you may remember a Midianite who was Moses' father-in-law, associated with helping Moses establish the way he was going to run things with judges and so on. And it's the Midianites who influenced, in a lot of ways, this copper serpent that we read about in the Bible. And guess what we find here in this this Egyptian temple to Hathor that was taken over by the Midianites and became a Midianite temple? We find a copper serpent, just like the one would read about in the Bible. There are also, of course, some spectacular archaeological finds. Like, I know it's very hard to see. There's a very difficult to get a good photo of these rock carvings from 3,500 years ago, done probably by bored miners, some of them slaves perhaps, carvings that depict Egyptian chariots and hunting scenes. Here you can see a little more clearly the Egyptian soldiers and the Egyptian workers. The Egyptian soldiers, you'll see, are armed and on chariots, and the Egyptian workers working away, and they are hunting the animals that I don't think you can see too clearly. Maybe on the next slide you may be able to see some of them, that are ibex. And I know the next slide is this one, and these are the Solomon's pillars, as we call them, that are actually nature's erosion of some beautiful geology in Timna Park. The colors are spectacular. In the next couple of slides, I want to show you a few other things that you can see here in Timna. These are what we call mushrooms. A hardened surface keeps intact the softer sandstone below, as the wind and water create a mushroom effect. There are several of these mushrooms. They're large stone mushrooms that are quite spectacular, like this one, for instance. And we have arches, also all nature's creation. Near the arches, as you can see, are many digs of surface copper that they dug out on the right-hand side of the slide. But these arches are also beautiful to visit. The spiral mountain, we call this. The spiral mountain that you can walk up In some angles, it actually looks like the Sphinx. Many people see faces in the rocks around. Here is another crawl through where mining was done. And as I said, there's so much to explore in Timna. The geology is fabulous, it's spectacular. The history with the mining in the Egyptian temples, an added bonus. And the views all around are fabulous. Incidentally, those who are interested in a little bit of physical activity, you could actually hire bikes at the Timna site and cycle through 5 hours, 6 hours if you're energetic, and less is also possible. They even have, for people like me, electric bikes to hire. And you can hire them for 4 hours and do the 6-hour route in 4 hours on an electric bike. Here's another one of the mushrooms. I can certainly show you on the map the location. It is very close to Eilat, just before getting to Eilat on the 90 highway, about 30 kilometers before Eilat. You're at Timna. 20-minute drive.
That last photo, several of those photos, it's like desert art. It's just so spectacular that I think anyone who's been on that either drive or flown down to Eilat in order to skip the drive on the way down, I think has hopefully found has something to add to the bucket list. So where behind you in the photo, where in your virtual shot behind you now are you depicting?
I'm sitting before Solomon's pillars. There are Solomon's pillars behind me in Timna. And if I move away a little bit, you'll see that I showed you another photo with Solomon's pillars there.
I'm going to do the same thing and I'm going to let the audience guess where they think my photo is being taken from. While I ask Reuven a couple of questions that we have coming in. If anyone wants to guess where my backdrop is, you can see the landscape, but where is the picture being taken from? If anyone wants to guess. Reuven, there was a question earlier about the reference to Qumran National Park. Is that run and operated by Kibbutz Kalia?
It is indeed. It is indeed. Kibbutz Kalia is right beside Qumran, and they operate it for the national parks, of course, of Israel. It's an official national park of Israel, but operated by Qumran.
And there were clearly, several references to the proximity, obviously, with Jordan. One of maybe the most loyal tourist to the Arava region. We learned also on a previous webinar that we did with Yossi Leshem, are migrating birds. This is a very popular region for both native species as well as migratory birds. So this is a special place for birders to visit as well.
Well, talking about the proximity with Jordan, many people don't realize that in the middle of the center of the Arava on the map that I showed you earlier, right in the center of the Arava is a moshav called Tzofar. Tzofar is a moshav that is very close to the Jordan border, the Jordanian border, and is actually carrying out agriculture east of the Jordan border for about 2 or 3 miles east of the Jordan border in Jordanian territory by leasing land from Jordan. By leasing land from Jordan with the Oslo Accords and with the peace that we signed in 1994 with Jordan, they agreed to lease this land for agricultural purposes for the kibbutz. So the kibbutz is actually growing, kibbutz Tzofar, Moshav, Tzofar is actually growing Israeli vegetables over the border in Jordan on leased land.
Reuven, one last yes/no question. Somebody's asking about the hot air balloons in the Arava. Do they still do that? What time of the year is that?
They do that. There's been a break, of course, of a Corona break, as they call it, but they do that. And I don't remember exactly what time of the year they do it, but they publicize it very well, so you can't miss it.
Great. Well, Reuven, we're at the end of the hour. Ted won the trivia question. My backdrop is a picture taken from Masada, the place where we learned the origin of the Methuselah story, and Methuselah's great-great-great-grandchildren, or actually his children from another marriage. And among the many amazing highlights on this tour. Reuven, I know we won't have you next month for August, but we'll look forward to in September resuming the series. We have lots of other wonderful treats for our audience, starting with next week. For those of you that need a little wetness after all this dryness, we will be in the Mediterranean, literally in the Mediterranean. We're doing a program with a fascinating organization called Sisu, which uses sea kayaks. So if you can picture somewhere between Tel Aviv and Haifa, those sea kayaks in motion, you're going to get to see them and hear about how the sea is used for both recreational. These sea kayaks are used for both recreational and also therapeutic use, working with veterans dealing with different physical and mental challenges. It's an absolutely fascinating story. So we hope you'll be with us. As with everything over this summer, the news keeps going back and forth on when we're going to be able to get back on a plane and enjoy some of these places in person. But in the meantime, where we can gather together in the ways that we can on our virtual tours, on our other series. We want everyone to have a safe week, a safe rest of the summer. And Reuven, thanks again for all the great insights and for touring with us while we can here on Sunday. Have a great week and Shavua Tov.
Shalom, Shavua Tov. Lovely to be with you. See you again soon.